Judas and his decisions versus, the other apostles' decisions. And so there's two different choices people can make in life. As we were talking about that, I was thinking a bit more about Daniel chapter 2 and that dream where there's this rock, right, that hits the statue and it crushes it, destroys it. And then the rock grows into a mountain. And one of the things I thought is, of course, we mentioned before, Nebuchadnezzar, he was very fearful of this event, of this rock, this image being destroyed and everything else. This dream disturbed him a lot. And I thought, the same way Daniel, when he got that dream from God, as far as what the dream was, I'm pretty sure, Daniel wasn't disturbed by this rock that comes to destroy this statue. And it grows into the mountain. I think Daniel's perspective is the rock, grows into the mountain. And there's many passages in the Bible, in Psalms and Isaiah, and then in the New Testament that talk about the stone. Jesus Christ, he's either the cornerstone or he's a stumbling stone. And so, it's in the same way that I think that image comes through a little bit in that dream that Nebuchadnezzar had regarding the stone. People either fear the stone to crush, to destroy, and certainly Jesus Christ is going to come to judge. And either that's going to be a fearful event, or that's going to be an event where we look forward to because we know what's coming after. So anyways, I was thinking about that and thinking a little bit more just about that stone and its imagery that it brings across as far as how someone looks at it and accepts it. But looking at Daniel chapter 3, I also wanted to think about trying to have more time for any questions at the end. I know lately it's kind of been, running right out of time right at the end and so forth. So hopefully try to reserve maybe a few minutes at least for people if they have any questions or comments or thoughts. At some point it'd be nice just to get an idea of what you guys found interesting or what you found maybe new or something like that while you've been going through the study of Daniel here with me. So today we'll begin in chapter 3. I'll just read through verses 1 through 7 here. And it says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plains of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Just pausing here for a moment, the very first verse, as I noted here, deals with looking at the characteristics of the statue, obviously of gold. And some people have noted, did Nebuchadnezzar make this soon after the dream? Because he knew he was the head of gold in the dream, and this, it may have had something to do with that. Nebuchadnezzar, he was very fearful of that stone, but this gold image of him being the head, I'm sure, very much appealed to him. One of the things that I didn't always think about is the dimensions of the statue, though. 60 cubits high, 60 cubits wide, or 6 cubits wide. That's not like a dimension of a human. So when we think about the statue, sometimes we think about this big statue. And if you look at yourself, maybe you're 1.5 feet wide. I don't know, can be varying. Maybe if someone's really skinny, they can get to be 1 foot wide, but that would mean you're 10 feet tall. As far as it's 10 times the width. So if you're 1.5 feet across, then you're 15 feet tall. It's not really a human dimension other than, maybe it was on a big pedestal. You had a big, or some of these places have had totems and stuff like that. So anyways, we don't know, exactly what this image looked like, but it was definitely put in a certain way to attain a very high height. And maybe it was like a big, huge pedestal, and then there was an image of, we don't even know if it was an image of Nebuchadnezzar for sure, but this image of possibly him on top of this big, huge pedestal. But very much something focused on being able to see it from long. I mean, putting in the plains of Dura, just thinking of the plain, is obviously something where a lot of people could see it from far, far away. It'd be something noteworthy. And so, when reflecting on these, I noted these three sorts of characteristics that you see from there. The gold representing very much the wealth, the power, maybe in its height, so that it was something of prominence, as well as, where it was located. All these factors trying to, point to maybe different aspects of the king and the kingdom. And then the second thing I noted was the audience. And there's a lot of different titles that come through here. I mean, satraps, prefects, governors, counselors, treasurers, justices, magistrates. Some of the words that are used here, people aren't really sure what those positions were, because, I mean, it's ancient Aramaic, and we don't have the Babylonian history fully as far as what were the positions of different people within that kingdom, what kind of setup did they have. But they did seem to indicate like the governors may have been military leaders in some respects. So anyways, I think the main point is that it was trying to say all the various offices of the government were involved in this. And not only that, as it goes on there, it says, then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up." And, just like it mentions all these various offices within the government, I thought it was interesting that it's mentioning all these various musical instruments. And so one of the things I seemed to get from this was it was to be an all-inclusive activity, right? Because even later down, it says, it's all peoples, all nationalities, all tongues. We have not only all parts of government, we have all musical instruments. Don't leave any musical instrument out. We want to represent everything here. And then we have all nationalities, all tongues. We want to represent all people. It's like this whole unifying event for the nation. I mean, sometimes we think of this thing as saying like, oh, Nebuchadnezzar just wanted to be worshipped. Well, we're really not sure what this image was, if it was Nebuchadnezzar or not. It was a big golden image. It had prominence, but it was supposed to involve everyone in the nation. And it was supposed to, as some have thought, there may have been a problem of someone trying to usurp the government. And who knows if this might have been during the time in which Judah had rebelled. They had two rebellions after Daniel arrived in Babylon. And it could have been during one of the rebellions by Judah or other parts of who Babylon had conquered. And so they're kind of come together and say, okay, who is with us and who's against us? If you're not with us in this unifying moment, then there's a consequence. So anyways, I found that very interesting as far as, how people are trying to bring about this inclusiveness, saying like, if we include everyone, then that should be very unifying, because we're all inclusive. Everyone's welcome to do the things that we do, how we do them. And, if you don't want to be part of us, then, we're going to cast you away. It's interesting when you look at that and, things that happen today as far as inclusivity, and if you're with us, then you're welcome. But if you don't do what we do and you don't say what we say and you don't act like we act, then you are to be cast out. Anyways, I guess, as we think about these things, times don't really change all that much. And so, anyways, it says, when the herald proclaimed that they would sound all these instruments, they were to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as all the people heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So, I mean, as the last part I just mentioned, alluded to a little bit before, some of the functions that we see there. And again, I kind of see it in some respects as being this idea of nationalism. This is the idea that the kingdom, it comes first. And so we are to put the king, we are put the nation above all else. And, that's what everyone seemed to be willing to do. And they're saying, this very severe thing of throwing people into a fiery furnace if they don't do this. I mean, to us, this sounds kind of strange, right? How can you throw someone in a fiery furnace just because they don't bow down to an image? But again, I think this whole idea of inclusion, unity, nationalism, the nation and the king comes first above all else. And if that's not true, then you're a loose cannon. We don't know what you're going to do, but obviously you're not going to help promote the kingdom and further its goals. And so anyways, I mentioned some of the things. Gratefulness, of course, to the kingdom and so forth. And then I mentioned, after this we see the rebellion. And maybe we don't always think of it as the rebellion, these rebellious three. But it goes on to mention here that therefore at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar. And again, if they charged the Jews, again, maybe this was occurring during one of the rebellions of Judah. It kind of, some make sense saying, like, we got Judah rebelling against us and we got Jews among us here. And they don't do what we do. So anyways, they declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music." This is the third time it's listed all the music. I find that remarkable that someone goes through listing all the different instruments that are there. When you've heard all these various instruments, I would just be like, whenever the music plays, but, they make a point of saying all these instruments, when all these instruments are played, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. And so one of the things I wrote down here is the crime of these men, the charges that were brought up against them. I found it helpful looking at crimes or charges that are brought up in a sort of a judicial manner. And that's kind of what they're really doing. They're coming to the king. They're not just appealing to him to say, "Hey, king, you should be upset about this." They're saying, no, these are formal charges. They're saying, these guys, you made a decree, and these guys are disobeying it, and here are the charges that we're bringing against them. I say that because, when I studied the book of Acts, there are several places in the book of Acts where it's a courtroom setting. And I always found that kind of curious. Why does Acts have a courtroom setting in it so often? There's several different occasions in which you see a courtroom setting. Obviously with before the council with Peter and John, and then you have later on you have Stephen and his charges that were brought against him, and then much later on you have Paul. He's in Greece. I forget, Corinth or not Corinth, but he's in there, and there's charges brought against the way and so forth that that they weren't an allowed religion according to Rome and so forth. And in each of these, you see charges being brought forth. You don't see maybe them presenting all the charges all the time, but you see what were the charges. And then you always see the response. And the responses given always speak directly to the charges. It's a defense directly regarding each of those charges that were presented. And I found this very useful in Acts because if you remember in Luke, Jesus said that you would be brought before kings and all these others, and he says, and when you are charged, you don't need to worry about what you would answer. The Holy Spirit will provide that answer for you. And so that's, I think, one of the reasons why you see it so much in Acts is because of what Jesus said would happen. And in Acts, you see unfolding exactly what Jesus said would happen when you read that in Luke. And so I think here again, we have this sort of understanding that these charges are brought forward, and it's really the Holy Spirit helping these men to give an answer to the charges such that, that it's a proper defense. And as it says there, the defense that the Holy Spirit gives, as Jesus mentioned it, it's something that you can't argue against, really, that defense that would be given. So with these charges in mind, I said, there's really broken down by three different areas. First of all, they said they disregarded the king. There was an affront to his authority. Really, they're saying, your decree obviously meant nothing to these guys. So they're violating your decree directly. And then what are the contents? Well, they don't want to serve the Babylonian gods, and they don't want to worship the golden image. And so then we see after this, out of these charges, we obviously know the consequences of fiery furnace, but we get to see what there is their defense. So then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, and we can kind of understand the rage because they brought out that they disregarded Nebuchadnezzar. And here's a proud king, a very powerful king, and these guys are fairly high up in the infrastructure of their government, it seems, based on where Daniel had asked that they be appointed, as we had read prior chapter. So they brought these men before the king. Back up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in fierce rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" That's, to me, it's a little bit interesting as well, because if it's recently, in regard to this dream that Nebuchadnezzar just had, he was very fearful of this dream. And it also seemed clear to him that this dream was given to him by a true God, a very powerful God. And he just said in chapter 2, this is the God of gods, the Lord of all kings. He was greater than all gods. He was greater than all kings. He had authority over there. And now he's saying, gods are one thing, but he's like, this is here and now under my authority and power. So I think in some ways he's saying, even though there is someone greater, there is, within my area of domain, my power, is unanswered, unquestioned. No one's ever seen a god defy a king or something like that. I don't know. Anyways, it's interesting to me how much he views his authority even after the dream that he just had and the fear he had of that dream. So anyways, the fiery furnace, and then we get into the defense. And so, reading the defense, verse 16. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king." So really, this immediately answers the first charge. They said, they disregard the king, and their answer is kind of like saying, yes. It's a pretty bold statement. Sometimes you think about if someone were to ask you, you have to do this, you would just say, no, I'm not going to do it. But they go beyond saying just no, and they say, we don't need to answer you because there's someone greater than you. And we answer to God. We answer, they don't say that specifically, but obviously they're inferring that they answer to God, not to him. And we see this exact same response used by the apostles later on, if we remember. When they come before the council, they command the apostles to say, don't speak about Jesus. And they say, ought we to obey God rather than men? Or, or ought we to obey, God or man? And you see that same sort of thing then. Of course, that's a lot more meaningful to the council and the Sanhedrin and so forth than it is to Nebuchadnezzar. But obviously, the first response is that, of course they can disregard the king. He doesn't have authority in this matter. And then here's the answering to the second two. It says, but if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So I wrote down some of the things that they bring up across in their defense as well. First of all, I think not only are we recognizing God's authority in this matter, but he's also saying, in some ways, if they are guilty of something here, it is God they answer to in this matter, not the king. And so God being judge, God having the supreme authority here, is the one who will rightly judge their case regarding their actions. Isn't that true when we think about the implications for our own lives? Someone might say to you, you're not supposed to cast stones at another person, so forth, or judge not lest ye be judged. Although there's times where, as we've recognized, other people can lovingly come to you and mention something, but ultimately, God is our judge, right? In all matters that we do, and even if someone says, you can disregard what someone else may say to you, but obviously we can't disregard what God says to us. And I think that does come across in how these guys are presenting their case, saying, we don't need to answer you. God is really their judge. God is the one they answer to. God's the one that all of us answer to for our actions. And I mention that because I see a contrast regarding what happens after this. And so anyways, I see that. There's also the supremacy of God, which, as we've mentioned, is a major theme of the book of Daniel. You see the supremacy of God mentioned time and time again, the factors regarding his supremacy. And also, what they mention there relates directly to what is mentioned in Deuteronomy, even found in the Ten Commandments, so pretty well known. And after this, we see the judgment. And here's the contrasts that I kind of painted here. There's what is the consequences of Nebuchadnezzar's judgment. And then I think after that, we're going to see the consequences of God's judgment on their actions. So their actions, this is what Nebuchadnezzar says should happen for a result of their actions. And after that, we're going to see, no, God says, well, this is what God thinks should happen. Or this is what God shows will happen as a result, or does happen as a result of their actions. So anyways, beginning in verse 19, we say, then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And I do pause there. First of all, obviously, aren't we thankful that God never judges in rage? He can be angry at sin. We understand that, but his judgment is not made just in rage. Just as anger, pure anger, is not the basis of his judgment. And the second part here is it was heated 7 times. And this is a curious thing. The fact that Nebuchadnezzar heated it 7 times. Why did he choose the number 7? Well, we don't really know exactly, but we do know that in Leviticus you see a passage. And again, I don't know what Nebuchadnezzar might have known about the Hebrews and their scripture and so forth. Certainly Daniel was nearby. We don't know where Daniel is in all this. Obviously, that's one of the questions where you're like, where's Daniel? It's his 3 friends, and where is he? And one of the things it talks about in Leviticus is this is a punishment. If people still won't listen, the punishment will be 7 times. And that's also something you see in Genesis with Cain, in a way, right? After Cain killed his brother Abel, God put a mark on him, and Cain says, what if someone kills me? And God says, well, it will be 7 times what's done to him. And it's this idea, I think, anyways, the 7 times is this idea that it's this defined act of disobedience. And God has the same sort of concept there, where there's this, if someone is defiantly disobedient to him, continues in this way, you see it with Cain, because he said once he put the mark, well, Cain killed Abel. The disobedience is murder. And he bears a mark to testify to everyone about murder. Not that he bears a mark just to say, guys, I'm the guilty one, I did this, and certainly that was true, but it's also a reminder to everyone to say, this is a reminder of how wrong it is to murder, that you think it won't get found out, but God sees it. And no matter where you are, what you're doing, Cain didn't think anyone would know that he murdered. Everyone knew that he murdered his brother, didn't think it would be found out, but God knew. And now he bears this mark as testimony to everyone else that you shouldn't murder. And now if someone murders Cain, God says 7 times it will be done to him. And so I think in some ways that reminded that murder's wrong. If you didn't learn the lesson by seeing my mark on Cain, then you're really not understanding this concept of how I view this sin. And I think it carries out here in the Old Testament as well. They said, if you continue to be disobedient towards me, if you continue to take my law and disregard it, and not just say, well, I'm sorry. No, you defiantly say, no, I don't have to regard your law, God. Well, he says, well, 7 times will be done to this person that is so defiantly disobedient. Anyways, I put Leviticus in there for further study to look at that passage, Leviticus 26, and to read about that 7 times, because I think it also does come out later on, not just here. But anyways, maybe that may not have been why Nebuchadnezzar did it. Maybe he did know about it, and he wanted to show to them, this is an act of defiance against my authority. And so I'm going to do 7 times to you to demonstrate that. I don't know, but it's a possibility. And I think it's interesting that it comes up here, and I think it comes up later on as well. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. And again, you have to wonder, why did he need the mightiest men? I'm sure just several men in the army could have done it, but he wanted the mightiest men. I think in some ways to show they were saying that God could rescue him out of his hand. And I think he wanted to show you want to realize the might that I command. And so he gets the mightiest men. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. And then after that, we see what God's judgment is regarding the 3 men and their actions, I think. So then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." And so some of the things I noted here is, their actions brought forth fellowship. Their actions of obedience to God, to disregard what a man would say, brought fellowship with God. It also brought freedom. They were unbound. They were allowed to bring about. It also provided a witness. Later on, we'll see that they say these guys are walking among the gods, and he even remarks to that. Verse 26, it says, "Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, 'Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here.'" So I think, again, their actions provided a witness. And then they said after that, Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. And Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him, and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. And so, as we see the judgment, we come upon the conclusion of this matter. And first of all, God is praised, even by Nebuchadnezzar, who thought no God could deliver them out of his hand. He acknowledges the supremacy of God in that way. He also acknowledges, I think later on, the worthiness of God. Verse 28. He acknowledged that, it was right for them to disregard his command. So in that way, their God is really the only one that's due that worship and service. And then also, that there's no other God. Therefore, I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. I mean, here's a man that is pretty dramatic in all of his statements, I think. I mean, he goes from saying, if you don't serve Babylon, if you don't bow down to this image and worship it, you're going to be thrown in the fiery furnace. And now he goes from that to say, anyone that speaks against this God is going to be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, for there's no other God we're able to rescue. So anyways, Nebuchadnezzar seems to be a pretty dramatic guy as far as how he sees things and how he wants things done. I'm sure he's a kind of guy that says things have to be done my way or no way. But I just find it remarkable, though, that he goes from such an area where he says, there's no God greater than me. And of course, this was a miraculous thing, to such an area where it's like anyone that speaks against this God, there's going to be terrible consequences for them. Torn limb from limb. I mean, that's not something you see every day. But yeah, I think in the end, you see all of this that comes about to change, not only change the perception that Nebuchadnezzar has, but it also comes about to protect the nation, really, the Jewish people, to let them know that they don't need to worship this image either. I don't know what Jewish people might have worshipped the image. Obviously, they pointed out these three men. They were in a prominent position, and so they probably, didn't like that these Jews were in these positions. But there probably were some other Jews, because they did originally come about with this charge that says, the Jews among us are not worshiping it, and here's three men. But I think it also served as this purpose of protection, to let them know that you can continue to not have to serve this image. And I also see that protection later on in the book of Acts, because each of those court cases, particularly the one where it was charging the way, to say that this way was not a protected religion, the result of that is that court case got thrown out because the people, when they brought their accusation against it, and you see in Acts, they also mentioned that they don't, I forget, it had something to do that they don't observe the things that we do, or we don't. They're in a way, though, acknowledging that the way worships the same or follows the same God that the Jewish religion follows, but they do different things. And so that's part of why the guy threw it out, because he's like, I'm not concerned about what someone does or doesn't do in following their God, but you're acknowledging here that they follow the same God as you, so it's pretty much the same religion. I mean, that was the Roman view of it as far as what that court goes. And what that did was saying, the people who followed the way, the Christians, They were now part of this protected religion within Rome. They could worship freely, just like the Jews could worship freely, because the Jewish religion was protected by Rome. People who were Jewish could worship freely. And now people who are Christians, who followed the way. Again, that doesn't mean that the Jewish people didn't stand against them, but the Romans wouldn't have to stand against them because the way was known as being, well, it's really part of the Jewish religion. And so it served as a protection. So anyways, I find that same truth goes through many of these court cases because of the actions of a few men. God's able to help give a defense and provide protection for his people, even amidst all the disobedience that they've been through time and time again. You know, I had a thought on Friday, as we think about Good Friday and today, the resurrection. And I mentioned to Pastor, I was reading through Matthew during that day. And as I was reading through, reading up to the time where he is arrested and then brought before the council there and so forth, and then even up to the time where then, I think it's, you know, he's on the cross and it goes from the 6th hour to the 9th hour. And it was about, you know, after that, it was dark, and then after that, he said, you know, my God, why have you forsaken me? And, you know, the thought I just had was just, I think, similar to maybe what people might think here, is that we are so unworthy of what God gives us. I mean, that he would do this thing for us, that he would be willing, you know, there's the factor of saying, you know, being beaten. There's all the things leading up that he was willing to go through for us. But at the very end, that the Father would turn away someone who he had always had fellowship with. And he'd be willing to go through that, to have the Father forsake him. I mean, these other things as far as physical and so forth, we say, well, you know, I wouldn't want to go through any of that stuff either. But, you know, the emotional anguish, I think also that Jesus went through, having to endure these things. And he didn't really have to. But because of his love, he did. And I think that also comes out here in this passage. He loved them, the Jewish people, even though they were continually disobedient to him. Even though he now is disciplining them, they're not just being disciplined, but they're under this curse of exile. As you read in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, this is part of the curse. If they do not follow, exile is the ultimate end of the curse. And during all this time, even though continually being disobedient, he still provides a way in which they're protected to continue to worship him if they would just turn to him. That they're continued to be blessed in some ways, even being provided within this nation now, Babylon. So anyways, these are just different thoughts I had as I read through this. I don't know if you have any comments you'd like to make, any questions. We have a few minutes here before we'll end. If there's anyone who has comments or questions about the passage. Yeah, Richard. Yeah, I mean, he says it looked like the Son of God, and then later on he says an angel. But yeah, obviously, I think he probably says that because it's like, well, we only threw 3 in. There's a 4th. He seems to have come from nowhere. So he's something like, yeah, you're right. How does he know who this 4th is? But obviously, we don't even know how they recognize it. Because, you know, you wonder about that with Abraham, right? When he was sitting in his tent and there was these 3 men, he knew they were angels. How did he know that? We don't know. But something seemed to indicate that he says, these aren't just men that are coming to me. So anyways, yeah, it's interesting. We've never seen angels, as far as I know, no one in here. But, I mean, if someone did, they would give us insight on that, but yeah. All right, I'll just close in prayer, and we'll get ready for the second service. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you once more for your word. I thank you for this book of Daniel, how it's a reminder that among all things that happen, you are supreme. You are the one that controls who it is that stands in power. You are in charge of what positions people hold. You are in charge of even the things as far as how we may be protected from things that may happen to us or what men might try to do. And I thank you once more for this reminder of your love and protection that you give even to those people like us that are not worthy. How your love just continues to be poured out. And you provide ways for people, even when there seems to be no way, against the power and authority of others or the fear that we might have of men and what they might do and what the power of Satan may be and what may stand against us. And I just thank you once more for the reminder that you are supreme above all things. You are not sitting idle on the throne, but you are active here today. You are active not only in this church, but within each individual. I pray you might help each of us to be a witness, to be able to stand boldly, to follow you boldly. And I also just thank you once more for this wonderful gift of salvation that you've given to us that would desire to call you Lord of our life. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.